You cannot stop the tide from coming in, and you cannot stop the truth from finally being told to the world. Witness the rising power of justice as it washes away the lies of the past. Hit subscribe now and be part of the wave that changes everything.
First thing my father said when he walked into my restaurant wasn't congratulations. It wasn't I missed you. It wasn't even my name. It was we need to talk about your brother. He was standing in the middle of my dining room, the one I had built from a gutted 1940s warehouse in Savannah with my own savings and 4 years of 18-hour days, wearing the same fleece vest he'd worn to every family event since 2009, holding a manila envelope, looking at the exposed brick walls and the hand-forged light fixtures like he was appraising a property he already owned. My mother was behind him. She didn't make eye contact. She never did when she already knew the ask was wrong. I had been open for exactly 11 days. Let me back up, because the restaurant part isn't where this story starts. The silence is where it starts. 3.5 years earlier, I had called my parents to tell them I was leaving my corporate catering job in Atlanta to open my own place. I'd been a culinary director for 6 years. I had money saved. I had a business plan that 2 different restaurant consultants had called unusually solid. I was 31 years old and I had been working toward this specific thing since I was 19. Standing in my grandmother's kitchen in Beaufort, watching her make biscuits from memory and thinking, I want to do this. I want to do this for real. My father's response was, that's a terrible idea. Restaurants fail. You have a good salary. Don't be stupid. My mother's response was silence, which was her way of agreeing with him without having to say it herself. I said I was doing it anyway. My father said, then don't come to us when it falls apart. And that was the last real conversation we had for 3.5 years. I want to be precise about what that silence looked like, because people hear we weren't talking, and they imagine some dramatic estrangement with shouting and slammed doors. It wasn't like that. It was quieter and more suffocating than that. It was my birthday passing with a 2-line text from my mother that said, hope you have a nice day, and nothing from my father at all. It was Christmas where I flew to see my college friend Petra in Denver instead of going home to Savannah because I couldn't stand one more dinner where every topic was a minefield and the subtext of everything my father said was I told you so even though the restaurant didn't even exist yet. It was my brother texting me occasionally, not to check in, I would learn later, but to report back, and me being so desperate for any family contact that I answered his messages warmly for 2 years before I understood what he was doing with them. My brother is 34. His name is Soren. He has always been the one my parents built their hopes around, and he has always disappointed them, and they have always found a way to make his failures someone else's fault. In high school, it was his teachers. In college, it was his roommates. In his 20s, it was his business partners, and then his ex-wife, and then the economy, and then, increasingly, me, the sister who had left and abandoned the family and wasn't there to help carry the weight. The weight, in this case, was Soren's gambling debt. Roughly $60,000 of it, accumulated over 3 years at various card rooms in Georgia and South Carolina, which I did not know about because no one told me and also because I had been erased, but which my parents had apparently been quietly managing, covering minimum payments, moving money around, hoping it would resolve itself, until it didn't. I found all of this out on day 11. I had opened Lane's on a Tuesday in early October. Lane is my middle name. My full name is Josephine Lane Whitford, which is a lot of name, and I have always gone by Joe except on the awning of my restaurant, where I wanted something that felt warm and slightly mysterious and entirely mine. The space was on Factors Walk, which runs along the Savannah River, and if you have never been to Savannah, you should understand that Factors Walk is one of the most beautiful streets in America. All cobblestones and iron staircases and buildings that have been standing since before the Civil War. I had spent 4 years and every dollar I had making my corner of it into something I was proud of. The first 11 days were chaotic and imperfect and completely unexpectedly wonderful. We were full every night. A food writer from the Atlanta paper came on day 4 and wrote something kind. My sous chef, a 26-year-old from New Orleans named Cecile, who was the most naturally gifted cook I had ever worked with, was finding her footing and making it look easy. My front-of-house manager, a tall, precise man named Wick, who had been running dining rooms for 20 years and had answered my job posting on a whim, was the kind of calm, professional presence that made everything around him run smoother. I was tired in the specific way that feels like evidence of something good. The kind of tired where you fall asleep before your head hits the pillow and wake up already thinking about the day. And then my father walked in at 4:45 on a Tuesday, an hour before dinner service, with my mother behind him and a manila envelope under his arm. I was at the pass, reviewing tickets with Cecile. I saw him through the service window before he saw me, and I had approximately 4 seconds to decide how I was going to handle this. I chose, professionally. I came out from the kitchen. I said hello. I did not hug them because they did not move toward me, and I was not going to perform warmth for an audience that hadn't earned it. I asked Wick to seat us at the corner table by the window, the one with the best view of the river, because I was still, even then, trying to do the right thing. My mother looked at the restaurant the way people look at things that surprise them when they had expected to be unimpressed. She touched the edge of the table lightly, like she was checking if it was real. My father looked at me and said, "We need to talk about your brother. I'll tell you exactly what was in the envelope." There was a summary of Soren's debt, itemized, printed from what looked like a spreadsheet my father had built himself. $62,400 across 4 creditors, 2 of which were private individuals whose names I didn't recognize, which is a polite way of saying they were not banks. There was a letter my father had apparently drafted to me, though I had never received it, explaining the situation and asking for help. He said he had written it 6 months ago and hadn't sent it because he didn't think I'd respond. What he meant was he hadn't wanted to give me the opportunity to say no at a distance. He wanted to do this in person, in my restaurant with my mother sitting next to him as moral ballast. And there was a third document at the bottom of the envelope, which was a draft repayment agreement, with my name already typed in as the guarantor. I looked at that document for a long time. I looked at the line where my name was, at the font my father had chosen, at the amount, the full $62,000 that I was apparently simply going to agree to cover. I looked up. I said, "You typed my name on this before you talked to me." My father said, "We're talking now. You drove to my restaurant on my 11th day of business. It was the right time. You're doing well. You can afford. You didn't speak to me for 3.5 years. The table got quiet. My mother looked at the river. "Joe," my father said, and there was a warning in it, and I realized that the warning was, "Don't make this about that. Don't make the ask conditional on the silence. Separate the ledgers." That was always how it worked in my family. The taking was always in a different column from everything else. I thought about the birthday texts. I thought about Christmas in Denver, drinking wine with Petra's family and feeling grateful and hollowed out at the same time. I thought about Soren texting me cheerful, nothing messages for 2 years, while he was quietly drowning and our parents were quietly covering it and none of them had thought to say a word. I said, "I'm going to need a few days." My father started to say something about urgency. I held up my hand. It was a small gesture, but something about it stopped him. Maybe because I was standing in my own restaurant and he was sitting in a chair I owned, and the geometry of it was different from every conversation we'd had in that house in Savannah, where he stood at the head of the table and everything radiated outward from him. I said, "I have a dinner service in 50 minutes. You're welcome to eat. If you want to talk more, call me Thursday." My mother looked at me then, for the first time since they'd sat down. I couldn't read her expression. I wasn't sure I ever could. I called my attorney that night after service, sitting on an overturned milk crate in the alley behind the restaurant, because I needed air and I didn't want anyone inside to see my face while I was thinking. My attorney is a woman named Rosalind who has handled my business contracts and my lease negotiations, and who has a very specific way of going quiet on the phone when she's absorbing something and then coming back with a clarity that cuts through everything. I have trusted her judgment more than almost anyone since the day I hired her. I told her what was in the envelope. She went quiet. Then she said, "Do you want my legal read or do you want my personal read first?" I said both. The legal read, I had zero obligation. No court, no existing instrument, no family law in Georgia created any liability on my part for my brother's personal gambling debts. The draft agreement was exactly that, a draft, not a signed document, not a binding instrument, not anything other than my father typing my name into a Word document and hoping I would fill in the rest. The personal read, the 2 private creditors, were the part that worried her. Not because of me. Because of Soren. private debt outside the banking system, in amounts like this, from people whose names weren't on any business documents she could pull, had a texture she didn't like. She said, "If you want to help your brother, not your father, your brother, the cleanest way is direct, not through your father's document, not as a guarantor. Differently." I sat in the alley for a while after we hung up. The river was doing what the river does at night in Savannah, which is move slowly and smell like salt and history and make you feel like whatever you're carrying is smaller than it seems. I thought about Soren, the specific Soren before all the rest of it, the one who used to sneak into my room when we were kids and ask me to explain things to him. Math, books, why our parents were the way they were. I was always trying to explain things to him, even when I couldn't. He had this quality of genuine curiosity that I think life had done something to over the years, ground it down into something more anxious and reactive. I didn't think he was a bad person. I thought he was a person who had never had anyone believe he could handle his own problems, and so he had stopped trying to. I thought about my father, who had built a version of our family that kept everyone in position. Me as the one who ran, Soren as the one who failed, my mother as the one who smoothed, and who was now standing in my restaurant with a manila envelope trying to reinstate that arrangement by other means. And then I thought about what Rosalind had said, differently. I called my father on Thursday, as I'd said I would. He answered on the second ring, which told me he'd been waiting. I said I wanted to meet again, not at the restaurant, at his hotel. He named a Marriott near the riverfront. I said fine and asked if Soren would be there. There was a pause. He said Soren was in town. I said, "Good, I want him there. This involves him." Another pause, shorter. "All right." I brought two things to that meeting. I brought Rosalind, who sat next to me and did not say very much, but whose presence said something all by itself. And I brought a counter document that she had helped me draft over the preceding 48 hours, which I will explain in a moment. Soren was already in the room when I arrived. He looked the way people look when they've been told a thing is going to happen and they've been dreading it. Shoulders in, eyes moving. He said my name when I came in and I said his, and it was the first time we'd been in a room together in over 3 years, and I felt, suddenly, the specific grief of that which I had been keeping carefully in a box. I sat down. Rosalind sat next to me. My mother was on the small sofa by the window. My father was at the desk, and he had the manila envelope in front of him again, and I realized he had expected this to be a signing. I put my counter document on the table. I said, "I'm not signing your agreement, but I have a proposal." My father started to say something. I kept going. "I've looked at the debt, I've looked at who it's owed to. The bank debt is manageable and I'm not going to touch it. Soren can consolidate that himself and I'll help him find the right instrument to do that, but it goes in his name, not mine." I looked at Soren when I said this, not my father. Soren was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite identify. The private creditors are the issue. Those need to be resolved, and they need to be resolved now, not in installments. I turned to the document. I'm prepared to purchase those specific debts directly. Not give money to Soren. Not give money to you. I contact the creditors, I buy the paper, and Soren owes me. Clean terms. 4% interest, 7-year repayment. Rosalind drafted the agreement. The room was quiet. My father said, "That's you be getting it back in installments over 7 years. It's almost the same as just." "It's not the same," I said. "It's a legal instrument. It protects him from people I don't know, and it creates a real structure that he's responsible for, not you, him." I looked at my father. "And I need something else." He waited. "I need you to sign something too. Not financial. A letter. Acknowledging that the two of you and Mom, used Soren's money, the money that was supposed to be his education fund, to cover your 2019 tax debt. I know you did this. Soren told me, finally, the night before I called you. I'm not going to courts with it. I'm not going to do anything with it except keep it. But I need it acknowledged in writing because I am done pretending the ledger starts at 0. The room was very, very quiet. My mother made a small sound. My father's expression did something complicated. "How did you?" "Soren told me." I said it simply, not with anger. I had spent 48 hours processing the anger so that I could say it simply. Soren had his eyes on the carpet. I had called him on Wednesday night separately before calling my father, and we had talked for 2 hours. He had told me about the education fund. He had told me about carrying it for years, the way it had bent something in him, the shame of it. Not his own behavior, but that specific thing, the thing his parents had done and then never mentioned again. He said he had started gambling in part because it felt like it fit the story they'd already written for him, the one who wasted money, the one who couldn't be trusted. If they were going to see him that way anyway. I had cried on that call. I don't cry easily. I had sat in my apartment above the restaurant and cried for about 15 minutes while Soren sat on the other end of the phone in silence, and then I had said, "You're not going to do this alone anymore." And I had meant it. But I had also meant what I was now saying to my father, in this hotel room with Rosalind beside me and a legal document on the table. My father signed the letter. I want to say it more dramatically than that, but it wasn't dramatic. It was slow and uncomfortable, and at one point my mother started crying and I let her cry without rushing to fix it, which is something I had never done before in my life. I had always rushed to fix it. I had always been the one who managed the emotional weather of that family, the one who smoothed and translated and absorbed. I let her cry. I waited. My father looked at the letter for a long time. He looked at Rosalind. He looked at me. He said, "You planned this." "Yes. You planned this when you said you needed a few days. I called my attorney the same night you came to the restaurant." He was quiet. I watched something move through him. Not shame exactly, but something adjacent to it. The specific discomfort of being in a room where the power has shifted and you weren't the one who shifted it. He signed. My mother signed as a witness. I bought the private debts directly. I won't say what they cost, but less than their face value, because that is a thing you can negotiate when you approach private creditors calmly and professionally, and they would prefer a clean exit. Soren and I signed our agreement the following week. Rosalind notarized it. The bank debt I helped Soren consolidate into a personal loan that he applied for himself with his own name without my guarantee. He got it. It took longer than he expected, and it required some paperwork and some phone calls he didn't want to make, and he made them. He made them. My parents went back to Savannah 3 days later. My mother texted me from the road, "The restaurant is beautiful. I'm proud of you." It was the first time she had said anything like that in as long as I could remember, and I looked at the text for a while before I answered. I said, "Thank you, that means a lot." And I meant it. Not completely without reservation, but truly as a thing in itself. Soren and I talk on the phone every week or two now, not about money. About other things, the restaurant, his job, things he's reading, things I'm trying with the menu. He came to dinner at Lane's last month with a woman he's been seeing, a nurse practitioner named, well, that's his story to tell. They sat at the table by the river, the same one my parents had sat at, and I sent out a course I hadn't put on the menu yet. Something I was testing, and he texted me from the table. "This is the best thing I've eaten in my life." Which is objectively not true, but I saved the text anyway. My father has not called. I don't know what that means yet. I'm leaving space for it to mean something I can't predict. What I know is this: I built something. I built it without anyone's permission or approval or financial support or faith. I built it through 3.5 years of silence that sometimes felt like being erased, like the years between 28 and 31 had been quietly written out of the family story. Like I would only become real again when I failed and came back. I didn't come back like that. I came back like this, through the front door of my own restaurant, in my own city, with my name on the awning and a legal pad and an attorney beside me and a brother who, finally, had someone in his corner who wasn't trying to manage him. The letter my father signed is in a fireproof lockbox in my apartment. I haven't looked at it since the day he signed it. I don't need to look at it. I just needed to be there. I still think about that moment when my father slid the envelope across the table, not with anger anymore, more like recognition. Because I've come to understand something that took me a long time to be able to say plainly, what happened to me and what happened to Soren were both consequences of the same original thing. Not random, not accidental. Every silence has a source, and every source eventually produces exactly the kind of moment that showed up in my dining room on day 11. My parents built a family on an unspoken contract, one where love was conditional on compliance, where the person who asked questions or left or pushed back got quietly removed from the story, and the person who stayed and struggled got managed instead of helped. That contract produced the 3.5 years of silence I lived through. It produced Soren's debt and the shame he carried alone for years. It produced my father sitting in my restaurant with my name already typed into a document, genuinely believing that was a reasonable thing to do. What I had to reckon with, slowly and sometimes painfully, was that I had been shaped by that contract too. For most of my life, I had been the one who smoothed things, who translated, who absorbed the weather of that house so no one else had to feel it too hard. It took me until my early 30s, standing on my own 2 feet in a city where no one had any prior opinion of me, to understand that absorbing other people's chaos is not the same as being good. It looks like goodness from the outside, but underneath it is a kind of fear of what happens if you stop. Integrity, I've decided, is not the same as peacemaking. Real integrity is being honest about what a situation actually is, even when, especially when, the people in the room would prefer a different version. What I did in that hotel room wasn't coldness. It was honesty with a legal framework around it. My father had been dishonest for years, in small accumulated ways, and I named it. Not loudly, just clearly. The part I'm most proud of isn't the counter document, it's the Wednesday night phone call with Soren. That call required something different from strategy. It required me to set down my own grievance long enough to actually hear him, to understand that he wasn't just a subplot in my family drama. He was a whole person who had been failed in ways I hadn't fully seen because I'd been so focused on my own wound. Sitting with that, really sitting with it, changed what I did next. It turned a situation I could have handled as pure self-protection into something that was actually useful to another person. I used to think resilience meant going it alone, closed off, self-sufficient, needing nothing from anyone who had ever let me down. What I understand now is that resilience is more specific than that. It's continuing to think clearly when every instinct is telling you to react. It's building something over 4 years of silence and not letting the silence convince you that you were wrong to try. It's walking into a hotel room with your attorney and your counter document and your knowledge of what actually happened to the education fund and staying calm enough to change the outcome. The letter is still in the lockbox. I don't need to read it. I just need to know it's there, that the true version of events exists somewhere in writing, acknowledged, signed. Some things just need to be on the record.